I want you to picture something for a second. You're in the supermarket.
Okay.
You've got the cart with the one squeaky wheel. You're trying to dodge someone buying way too much kale, and you're heading toward the checkout. And right there, next to the greeting cards and the shiny balloons that say, "Get well soon," there's a display.
Ah, yes. The standard grocery store tableau. I know it well.
Exactly. It's just rows and rows of plastic pots. They're all wrapped in that crinkly cellophane that makes way too much noise. And inside, you have these tall, elegant stems with, white or purple or pink flowers. The Phalaenopsis, the moth orchid.
It is, without a doubt, the most recognizable houseplant in the modern world, maybe ever.
I think you're right. And here's the thing. For, I'd say 99% of us, our brain just categorizes it as generic gift item.
Or a last-minute apology item.
Right, exactly. It's $20. It looks really fancy for a week or two. You take it home, you put it on a windowsill, and then the confusion starts.
Do I water it? How much? Do I use an ice cube like that weird blog post said?
Yes. You forget to water it, or you water it way too much, and then, 3 months later, it's just a sad-looking stick in a pot of wood chips, and we throw it out.
Which is such a tragedy, really, because that disposable item you just tossed in the bin is, well, it's a biological marvel.
That is exactly what we are unpacking today.
Yeah.
We've got a stack of research here that basically suggests that supermarket flour is, I don't know, it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Or maybe an alien in sheep's clothing.
An alien is better.
Yeah.
Because it's the tip of an iceberg that involves, and I'm not making this up, Victorian grave robbing, high-stakes international theft, deceptive sex, and survival strategies that make a cockroach look, frankly, delicate.
It is a very, very deep rabbit hole. When you look at that moth orchid, you are looking at a member of what is arguably the largest family of flowering plants on the planet.
The scale of it is actually hard to wrap your head around. It's not like, oh, there are a few dozen kinds.
Well, not even close. We are talking about over 30,000 distinct species.
30,000.
That's species, not individual plants. And that number is just what we've found and named so far. And that's before you even start counting the man-made hybrids, which, number in the hundreds of thousands.
It's staggering. So to help us navigate this massive, massive family tree, without getting totally lost in the jungle, we're using a very specific guide for our deep dive today.
We are.
We're looking at Simple Steps to Success, Orchids by Liz Johnson.
And this is a really crucial choice of source material, because Liz Johnson isn't just someone who wrote a quick blog post about her houseplants. She is what you'd call heavy artillery in the botanical world.
Yeah, her resume is genuinely intimidating.
She is a member of the RHS Orchid Committee. That's the Royal Horticultural Society in the UK, which is the gold standard.
Okay.
She's an accredited orchid judge, which is a whole thing. But I think most importantly, she is the owner of McBean's Orchids.
And McBean's isn't just some roadside nursery. It's practically a historical monument.
It was founded in 1879. Think about that date for a second. 1879. That is the absolute peak of the Victorian era. So when we read Johnson's insights, we aren't just getting tips on how to water your plant. We are tapping into a continuous lineage of knowledge that goes all the way back to the absolute height of orchid mania.
So the mission today is pretty straightforward. We want to help you stop seeing these things as just pretty flowers and start seeing them for what they are. Incredibly complex, highly adapted survivors.
We're going to look at the history of human obsession with them, the bizarre anatomy that makes them work, and then get into the real freak show of species that look like dragons and spiders and other things.
And we absolutely have to start with the obsession, because humans have been, well, losing their minds over these plants for a very, very long time.
A long time.
It's not just a modern fad, right? This goes back way before the Victorians got involved.
Oh, way back. We can trace this fascination back at least 4,000 years, specifically in China.
4,000 years. But was it about the flowers? Were they putting them in vases?
Interestingly, no. It wasn't initially about the beauty of the bloom. It was about utility. They were used extensively in traditional Chinese medicine.
So they were grinding them up, making potions.
Essentially, yes. They were looking at the plant and thinking, this has power, this has a life force, and that underlying belief that the orchid is special, that it holds some kind of secret that has persisted for millennia.
But the real, I don't know, the cinematic drama, the stuff that feels like an adventure movie that really kicks off in the 19th century.
The Victorian orchid mania.
This is one of my favorite eras of history because it seems like everyone just had way too much money and absolutely zero common sense.
It was certainly a time of incredible excess, but for orchids, there was a specific catalyst. It all started when a man named William Catley became the first person in England to successfully flower a tropical orchid.
And what's so special about that? Were they just bringing back leaves before him?
Mostly dead sticks, frankly. The journey was brutal. But Catley, he was a merchant and horticulturalist, received a shipment from Brazil, and he noticed some strange-looking stems being used as packing material.
That's packing material.
Just junk to keep the other plants from shifting. He got curious, potted one up, and it bloomed. And when that huge, frilly, purple flower opened and the British public saw the colors, the shape, the sheer exotic nature of it, well, it broke something in the collective consciousness.
It was like nothing they'd ever seen before.
Nothing. It triggered a craze that absolutely rivals the Dutch tulip mania.
And this is where we get the orchid hunters. I love this term because it just sounds so predatory. We're not talking about gardeners in straw hats gently pruning roses.
No, not at all. These were adventurers, mercenaries, really. The big nurseries and the ultra-wealthy private collectors would hire these tough, often ruthless men to travel to the Amazon, to the Andes, to the jungles of Southeast Asia.
And their instructions were not, bring back a sample for study.
No. The source quotes this, and it's chilling. The instruction was to rip huge consignments of orchids from the wild.
Rip. That's such a violent word.
And rip is absolutely the operative word. It was a purely extractive industry, much closer to mining or logging than to botany. They'd go into a pristine forest, find a tree covered in a desirable orchid, and sometimes they'd just cut the entire tree down to get the plants.
That's wildly destructive. You're killing a 100-year-old tree for a few flowers.
It was ecological vandalism on a massive scale.
Yeah.
There are stories of collectors finding a new species, collecting thousands of them, and then burning the rest of the forest they were in just to create a monopoly.
No way.
Oh, yes, it was cutthroat. But the true tragedy, which Johnson's book really highlights, is the sheer wastefulness of the logistics.
You mean just getting them home?
Exactly. You have to put yourself in that context. There are no airplanes. There's no refrigeration. You are putting living tropical plants accustomed to a specific environment into crude wooden crates.
And then shoving them into the dark, damp hold of a wooden sailing ship.
A ship that could take months to get back to England. They face salt spray, extreme heat crossing the equator, freezing cold in the North Atlantic, not to mention rats, mold, a total lack of light.
The survival rate must have been just abysmal.
Catastrophic is the word for it. The vast majority of these plants, we're talking tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of them, perished before they ever saw the white cliffs of Dover. They simply rotted into a black mush in the crates.
So I have to ask, why do it? If 90% or even more of your cargo dies on the way, how is that a viable business model?
Because the 10% or the 5% or even the 1% that survived were worth an absolute fortune.
Oh.
A single new species, a unique color variant, could be sold at auction for the equivalent of thousands, even tens of thousands of dollars in today's money. It was a numbers game. You killed an entire forest to find the one diamond.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
But the source brings up a really interesting side effect of this incredibly high death rate.
Yeah.
It actually elevated the role of the artist.
Yes, this is a fascinating connection. Because the plants were so fragile and so many of them were short-lived, and because so many died in transit, documentation became this frantic race against time.
If a plant flowered, you had to capture it now. You couldn't just, take a quick photo on your phone.
Right. You needed a highly skilled botanical artist, and they became these crucial forensics experts.
So those beautiful, really detailed Victorian orchid prints we see on hotel walls and things today.
Those weren't just decorative art. They were vital scientific records. Often, the drawing was the only proof that a specific species had ever existed, because the plant itself would wilt and die a week later, never to be seen again.
So we have this era of plunder. Rich guys in top hats, funding the destruction of entire ecosystems. But then we hit the 20th century, and the source describes this massive shift. We move from the jungle to the laboratory.
This is the industrial revolution of the orchid world, and it all hinges on one specific and, frankly, quite tricky scientific breakthrough.
And that is?
The discovery of how to germinate orchid seeds on agar.
Agar is that gelatin stuff you see in high school biology, petri dishes, right?
Correct. Now, we're going to get into the why of this a bit later when we talk about anatomy, because it turns out that orchid seeds are, well, they're incredibly defective by nature. They're missing a key component that almost every other seed has.
Okay.
But scientists in the early 1900s figured out that if you put these dust-like seeds in a sterile flask on a nutrient-rich jelly, the agar, You could basically trick them into growing.
And that completely changed the economics of it all.
It collapsed the old economy. Utterly. Suddenly, you didn't need a dangerous expedition to the Andes. You didn't need to cut down a tree. You could take a single seed pod, which can contain millions of seeds, go into a clean lab, and produce thousands upon thousands of identical plants.
The orchid hunters were out of a job.
Completely obsolete. And then cloning techniques came along, and that accelerated it even more.
This is what the source calls the Silicon Age of orchids. I love that comparison because it immediately implies technology and mass production.
It is the perfect descriptor for where we are now. If you look at the modern orchid industry today, specifically where those supermarket moth orchids come from, it is not a garden, it is a factory, a high-tech factory.
The source mentions conveyor belts.
Conveyor belts, computer-controlled environments, automated watering booms, robotic arms moving trays of plants. The plants are cloned, grown in identical media, fed identical nutrients on a precise schedule, and induced to flower at the exact same time so they can be shipped to stores.
That's how they get that uniformity.
Yeah.
And that explains the price. That's why I can get a plant that used to cost a fortune for, $15 alongside my milk and my eggs.
Exactly. It democratized the flower. The orchid went from being a symbol of the ultra-rich, a status symbol, to a disposable commodity. But Johnson points out there's a very serious trade-off here.
The squeezing out of the little guy, the
Right.
specialist nurseries.
Yes, and the homogenization of the market. The big industrial growers in places like Taiwan and the Netherlands, they only want to grow plants that are easy to clone, that ship well, and that have big, round, inoffensive flowers in a few predictable colors.
They don't care about the weird species, the smelly ones, the tiny ones.
So not at all. There's no profit in it. So we are losing diversity, at least in the commercial space. And that is why specialized nurseries like McBean's are so incredibly important. They're the keepers of the flame.
Living libraries.
Exactly. They are maintaining the difficult, the strange, and the historical varieties that the factory conveyor belts have rejected.
Oh.
So if you want an orchid that looks like a spider or smells like cinnamon or grows upside down, you will not find it at the grocery store. You have to go to the specialists.
Okay, so we've established the history from ancient medicine to Victorian theft to these modern robotic assembly lines. But to really understand why this plant is so weird, we have to look under the hood. Let's do Anatomy 101. Because the source makes it really clear. An orchid isn't just a flower that happens to look a certain way. It's built differently from the ground up.
It's an engineering marvel. And the very first thing you have to notice, the thing that our brains pick up on immediately, is the symmetry.
The source calls it bilateral symmetry. What does that mean in, plain English?
It means that if you draw an imaginary line right down the center of the flower, vertically, the left side is a perfect mirror image of the right side.
Like a human face.
Or a butterfly.
Exactly like a human face.
Yeah.
Compare that to something like a daisy or a rose. You can slice a daisy in pretty much any direction through the center, and the halves will be symmetrical. That's called radial symmetry. But an orchid has a front. It has a face.
Which is probably why we're so drawn to them. Humans are just hardwired to look for and recognize faces.
It creates an immediate psychological connection. But structurally, beyond the symmetry, the orchid follows a very strict rule. The rule of 3.
3 sepals and 3 petals. Always. The 3 sepals are the outer parts. They're what protected the bud. And then inside you have the 3 petals. But
One of those petals is not like the others. It's the rebel.
the rebel petal. It's called the labellum. Or, more simply, the lip. And this is the orchid's masterstroke. One of the 3 petals has modified itself to be completely different in size, shape, texture, and color.
It's usually the biggest, flashiest part of the flower, right?
Almost always. It usually sits at the bottom of the flower, and its primary job is to act as a landing platform.
A runway for an insect.
A runway, a welcome mat, and sometimes, as we'll see later, a trap. It is designed with incredible precision to guide the pollinator to exactly the right spot to do its job.
So the insect lands on that runway, it's lured in, and it walks inside. And that's where it meets the column. This part sounded like science fiction to me. The source says it's a fusion.
This is the single defining feature that makes an orchid an orchid. If you look at almost any other flower, think of a lily, for example. You have the male parts, the stamens with the pollen, and the female part, the pistil, as separate little sticks sticking up.
Right, the ducty bits and the sticky bit in the middle.
In an orchid, evolution has completely melted them together. They are fused into a single, fleshy, waxy structure called the column. It sits right in the center of the flower. There's nothing else like it in the plant kingdom.
And what's the advantage of that? Why fuse them?
Extreme precision. It allows the plant to control the pollination event with microscopic accuracy, and the pollen itself isn't what I expected. I think of pollen as, yellow dust that gets all over my car in the spring. That's wind-borne pollen. It's a numbers game. A pine tree releases billions of grains hoping one lands in the right spot. Orchids don't trust the wind. They are far too calculating for that. They trust insects.
So they package their pollen differently.
They package it into these solid, waxy little masses called pollinia.
Like luggage.
Think of it more like a tiny, sticky backpack. When the target insect crawls into the flower to get its nectar reward, it brushes against the column. The plant then literally glues these pollinia onto the insect's back or its head.
It glues them on.
With a super strong, fast-drying cement. The insect flies off, totally unaware it's now a delivery vehicle for the orchid's genetic material.
That is so much more aggressive than a normal flower.
It ensures that 100% of the pollen from that flower goes to the next flower of the same species, rather than being wasted on the breeze. It's highly, highly efficient.
Okay, but the part of the anatomy that really blew my mind, and this connects all the way back to the history and the agar jelly, is the seeds. The source says a single pod can have millions of seeds.
Millions. And they are microscopic. They look like a pinch of dust.
But here's the unbelievable catch. They're empty.
They're not technically empty, but they are biologically incomplete. A normal seed, think of a bean or a corn kernel, is a perfect little survival kit. It has the embryo, which is the baby plant, and a packet of starch called the endosperm. That's the food to keep it alive until it can grow roots and leaves.
It's like sending your kid to college with a full fridge and a meal plan.
A perfect analogy. And the orchid seed.
The orchid seed is just the embryo and nothing else. No food, no starch, no resources.
It is a baby sent out into the world with literally no lunch money.
So how on earth did they survive? They should all just starve to death within hours.
They should, and in fact, most of them do. It's a strategy of immense numbers over individual success. But in the wild, the only way an orchid seed can germinate is through a symbiotic relationship. The seed must, by pure chance, land on a specific type of mycorrhizal fungus in the soil. A very specific fungus. The fungal threads then penetrate the seed, and normally a fungus eats a plant. But in this case, the tiny orchid embryo manages to reverse the flow. It hijacks the fungus's own digestive system and steals nutrients from it.
That's a parasite.
It is in its infancy. The fungus becomes the surrogate parent, feeding the orchid seedling for months, sometimes years, until it's big enough to produce its own leaves and make its own food through photosynthesis.
That is just unbelievably complex. It's a miracle any of them survive.
It is, and that explains why the Victorians failed so miserably for so long. They would bring these plants back, they'd get seed pods, they'd carefully plant the dust in the finest English potting soil, and absolutely nothing would happen.
Because the soil didn't have that one specific fungus from the Amazonian jungle.
Exactly, and that's why the agar jelly changed everything. The scientists realized, we can just replace the fungus. The sugar and nutrients in the jelly served as the food source. We bypassed millions of years of evolution with some gelatin and a sterile flask.
It really makes you look at that $15 plant differently. It's a survivor of a very, very complicated childhood.
It absolutely is.
Okay, so we've got the basic chassis. We understand the rule of three, the column, the parasitic babies. But what I really love about this book is what I'm calling the freak show section.
You're leaving the outliers.
Because once you understand the basic rules, you can really appreciate how creatively the orchid family breaks them. Some of these don't even look like flowers.
The diversity of adaptation is where the orchid family truly shines. And Johnson highlights some absolutely spectacular examples. We have to start with Dracula.
Dracula. I just assumed this was a common nickname, but it's the actual scientific genus name.
It is. It technically translates to little dragon, but the botanists who named it were absolutely giving a nod to Bram Stoker. These are found high in the cloud forests of the Andes.
And they look the part. The descriptions are, they're pure goth. Dracula vampira, Dracula diabola, the vampire Dracula, the devil Dracula.
They are stunning and slightly unsettling. They often have these dark, brooding, purple-black colors that look like dried blood. They have these long, thin, tapering tails that hang off the sepals.
And the center of the flower often has a pattern that, if you squint, looks remarkably like a monkey's face or even a skull.
It does. It's an amazing example of pareidolia.
So why? Who are they trying to impress with this haunted castle vibe? What pollinates something that looks like that?
Not bees or butterflies. They're often pollinated by fungus gnats. They're trying to mimic the look and, in some cases, the smell of mushrooms and decaying matter on the forest floor. They aren't trying to look pretty. They're trying to look like a damp, rotting snack.
Delicious. Okay, then we have the ones that move. The source talks about the spider orchid.
The Bulbophyllum genus. This is a massive, incredibly diverse group. The one the source mentions is a hybrid called the tie spider, and it has these incredibly long, slender sepals that dangle down from the flower.
And the book says they wave eerily in the breeze.
And that is the key mechanism. Movement. Insects, especially flies, are visually attracted to motion. The flower is constructed so that even the slightest breath of wind makes these long parts wiggle and twist.
So to a passing fly, it doesn't look like a static flower.
It looks like another insect or something alive. It grabs their attention and draws them in. And the parent of that particular hybrid is even more bizarre. Bulbophyllum medusae.
Named after the Gorgon Medusa from Greek mythology.
Because the flower cluster looks like a writhing head of snakes.
It does not.
Oh, it really does. The flower is actually a compact ball of dozens of tiny individual flowers, but each one has these long, white, thread-like petals that all hang down together. It looks like a writhing mass of white serpents. It's a spectacular plant, but again, it challenges our entire definition of what a flower should look like.
Speaking of challenges, we have to talk about Darwin. This is my absolute favorite story in the whole book because it plays out like a great detective novel. The orchid is Angraecum sesquipedale.
It's also called the comet orchid or the Star of Bethlehem. It's from Madagascar. And it's a beautiful, waxy, star-shaped white flower. Very fragrant at night.
But when Charles Darwin received a specimen in the 1860s, he noticed something really odd. It has a spur, a long, hollow tube hanging from the back of the flower.
And the nectar, the reward for the pollinator, is at the very, very bottom of that tube.
Right. And the tube isn't an inch long. It's 12 inches long. A foot.
An entire foot-long nectar spur.
So Darwin looks at this and, scratches his famous beard.
He does more than that. He applies the cold, hard logic of his theory of evolution. He writes essentially, nature does not waste energy. There is absolutely no point in a plant evolving to put nectar at the bottom of a 12-inch tube if nothing can reach it.
It would be an evolutionary dead end.
Precisely. So he makes prediction. He says, therefore, there must exist in Madagascar a moth with a tongue of proboscis that is 12 inches long.
And the scientific community at the time just laughed at him.
They ridiculed him. Entomologists, the insect experts, said, no such moth exists. That's absurd. A moth with a foot-long tongue would be unwieldy and ridiculous.
But Darwin held his ground. He just kept saying the moth must exist.
And for decades, it didn't show up. Darwin died without ever being proven right. But then, years later, explorers found it.
They found the moth.
They found the hawk moth. Its scientific name is Xanthopan morganae praedicta, the predicted moth. It's a huge moth that uncurls this massive, seemingly impossible proboscis, hovers in front of the flower like a hummingbird, and drinks the nectar from a foot away.
That's incredible. It was the ultimate vindication of his theory.
It was. The flower was a lock, and Darwin predicted the key without ever having seen it.
I love that. Okay, let's move to something that is just an engineering headache for anyone who tries to grow it. The upside-down orchid, the Stanhopeia.
Ah, the Stanhopeia. These are fascinating, but they are a nightmare for the novice grower. Because, as you'd expect, most orchids send a flower spike up toward the sun.
Makes sense.
Stanhopeia sends its flower spike down.
Straight down, like through the pot.
Straight down, right through the root ball and out the bottom.
So if you plant it in a regular plastic pot,
you will never, ever see the flowers. The spike will grow down, jam itself into the solid bottom of the pot, curl up into a deformed mess, and rot.
That just seems like a terrible design flaw. Why would it do that?
Because in the wild, they grow high up on the trunks and branches of trees. The flower is designed to hang down into the open air below the branch, where its incredibly powerful scent can drift freely on the breeze to attract its specific pollinators.
So in captivity, how do you even grow it?
You have to grow them in open wire baskets or wooden slat crates. You have to leave the bottom completely open so the flower spikes can push their way through.
And the scent is powerful.
Overpowering, really complex fragrances, spicy, vanilla, chocolate, medicinal. But the flowers are incredibly short-lived. They only last for 2 or 3 days. The source mentions they are a nightmare for exhibitors because trying to time that explosive, brief bloom for a specific show weekend is nearly impossible.
Then we have the villain of the group, the slipper orchid, Cypripedium. We see these a lot. They've got that cute little pouch that looks like a shoe or, well, a slipper.
It looks cozy, it looks inviting, but that pouch is a trap. It is a dungeon.
Okay, so how's it work?
An insect, usually a bee, is attracted to the color and the scent. It lands on the rim of the pouch, which is very, very slippery, and it falls in.
Plop.
Right. Now it's at the bottom of the pouch. It tries to fly out, but the space is too confined and the opening has curled inward. It tries to climb the walls, but they are polished and waxy and slick. It is trapped.
So it starts to panic.
The panic is part of the process. The plant has designed only one exit route. At the very back of the pouch, there's a little ladder of hairs leading up to a tiny opening. To get out, the trapped insect has to crawl up that ladder and squeeze its way through a gap that is extremely tight.
And I'm going to guess what's positioned right at that gap.
The column, with the pollinia and the stigma, the insect is forced to rub against the pollen to escape. It's forced labor. The plant essentially kidnaps the pollinator and only releases it after it has done its job.
Diabolical. Truly diabolical. And what about the imposters? The book mentions psychopsis.
The butterfly orchid. The name literally breaks down to psyche, which is Greek for butterfly, and opsis, which means resembling.
And it's not just a vague resemblance, is it?
It's uncanny. It has long, thin structures that look exactly like antennae, and the petals are shaped and patterned to look like butterfly wings. And it sits at the end of a very long, wiry stem, so it sort of bobs and dances in the breeze.
So it mimics a butterfly. Why?
To create a territorial response, a male butterfly sees it from a distance, thinks it's a rival male in its territory, and attacks it. In the process of trying to fight this other butterfly, it pollinates the flower.
It weaponizes aggression. Yeah. I like it. Okay, before we leave the freak show, there are two more we have to mention. The one that's not grown for its flowers at all.
The jewel orchid, Macodes petola.
The flowers are tiny and insignificant. Right?
Totally forgettable. You grow this one for the foliage. The leaves are like dark green velvet, but they are covered in this intricate network of veins that are an electric, sparkling gold.
The book says they sparkle in the sunlight.
They really do. It looks like a circuit board printed on a leaf. It's absolutely stunning.
And finally, the one orchid that almost everyone has in their kitchen right now and doesn't even know it.
Vanilla.
I think people just completely forget this. Vanilla is an orchid.
Vanilla planifolia. And it's not a typical orchid that sits in a pot. It's a vine. It's native to Mexico, and in the wild, it climbs up trees growing as much as 6 inches a day.
And the bean that we scrape into our creme brulee.
That's the seed pod of the orchid. The word vanilla comes from the Spanish vanilla, meaning little pod.
But why is it so expensive? I mean, real vanilla extract is pricey.
It goes right back to that classic orchid problem, pollination.
Yeah.
In its native Mexico, there is a specific species of bee, the Melipona bee, that is the only thing that can pollinate it. But when people tried to farm vanilla in other parts of the world, like Madagascar and Tahiti, they took the vine, but the bee didn't come with it.
So the vines grew, they flowered, but they never produced any pods.
Exactly. For decades, it was a total failure. So today, every single vanilla bean you buy, unless it's from that tiny region in Mexico, was hand-pollinated by a human being.
Every single one.
Every single one. A worker has to walk through the plantation, and for each flower, which only opens for one day, they have to use a small wooden stick or a thorn to manually lift up the little flap on the column and transfer the pollen. Millions of flowers, one, by hand.
That is an incredible amount of labor.
That is what you are paying for when you buy real vanilla. You're paying for the fact that the orchid is, as always, incredibly picky.
So we've covered the weirdos. Now let's talk about where they live. Because I think the biggest myth, aside from them being fragile, is that they all need to live in a hot, steamy jungle.
That is the Tarzan myth of orchids, and Johnson's book just completely dismantles it.
The geographic range she describes is shocking.
Orchids are found on every single continent except Antarctica. They grow from north of the Arctic Circle to the southern tip of South America. The rule of thumb is, if there isn't permanent ice or pure desert sand, there is probably a native orchid there.
So let's take a quick tour of the globe. We do have the cloud forests. That's the classic image we all have.
Yes. Places like the Andes in Ecuador or in Southeast Asia. This is the home of the epiphytes, the plants that grow on trees. And you have to think about that environment. It's not just hot. It's constantly wet. Clouds are literally rolling through the trees all day long. The air is basically soup.
And this explains those weird silvery roots we see on supermarket moth orchids.
Correct. Those are aerial roots. They aren't meant to be in soil. They're designed to hang in the air and pull moisture directly out of the humid atmosphere. They're covered in a sponge-like layer of dead cells called velamen. That's why you can't bury them in dense potting soil. They will suffocate and rot. They need to breathe.
But then you go just a little bit higher in the Andes. The source describes epidendrum orchids growing on craggy rocks.
This is a totally different vibe. This is what we call a lithophyte, a rock grower. Imagine a bare rock face at 10,000 feet. It's incredibly windy. The UV radiation from the sun is intense. It can freeze at night.
And orchids just live there.
They thrive there. These plants are tough as nails. They have thick, leathery, succulent-like leaves to protect against the sun and water loss. They grow in the tiny cracks of rocks, their roots feeding on moss and any debris that collects there. They're not delicate princesses. They are hardcore mountaineers.
And then, much closer to home for many of us, the golf course.
Yes, the temperate terrestrial orchids. In the UK and across Europe and North America, you have genera like Dactylorhiza, the marsh orchids, or the lady slipper orchids. These are terrestrial. They grow in the dirt, just like a daisy or a dandelion.
And you find them in meadows, on road verges.
Yes, in the rough on golf courses. It's entirely possible you could be teeing off right next to a stunning, complex, and sometimes endangered biological marvel and not even know it.
What about South Africa? The book mentions one from Table Mountain.
Disa uniflora, the pride of Table Mountain. It's a brilliant red orchid, and it has a very specific niche. It grows right next to waterfalls and in the gorges, where it gets constant moisture from the spray. It's a perfect example of hyper-specialization.
And Australia. The source mentions an orchid that is adapted to deal with fire.
Yes, the pterostylis or green hood orchids, among others. The Australian bush is a very harsh environment. It's dry, it's hot, and it's prone to regular bushfires.
So how does a soft-tissued plant survive a literal fire?
It acts like a doomsday prepper. It has underground tubers, little starchy storage tanks buried deep in the soil. During the hot, dry season, the part of the plant that's above ground completely withers and dies. It just disappears.
He plays dead.
Effectively. Then the fire sweeps through, burns all the grass and brush on the surface, and clears away all the competition for sunlight. The orchid is perfectly safe underground in its bunker.
And then the rains come.
When the seasonal rains come, it uses the energy in that tuber to shoot up a new leaf and a flower spike really quickly. It blooms, gets pollinated, and sets seed before the heat and dryness return. It actually uses the fire to its advantage.
That is just brilliant. It's a bunker strategy.
Yeah.
So this really highlights how they grow. We mentioned epiphytes on trees and lithophytes on rocks and terrestrials in the ground.
Right. And there's one more distinction the book makes, which is about the growth pattern. Monopodial versus sympodial.
Okay, what's that?
Monopodial is easy. Mono means one. Podial means foot. It has one main upright stem that grows from the top year after year. Think of your classic moth orchid or a vanda. It just gets taller and taller.
And sympodial.
Sympodial orchids grow sideways. They have a creeping rhizome that grows along the surface of the branch or through the soil. And each year, it sends up a new shoot, a new growth, which will flower and then stop growing. The plant's energy then moves along the rhizome to the next new shoot.
So it walks along the branch.
In a way, yes. A cataleya or a dendrobium is a good example. This is important for growers to know because it tells you what direction the plant is going to grow in.
It highlights the main takeaway here. Orchids are not one thing. They are a family of 30,000 different solutions to the problem of survival.
But there is one problem, one threat they are really struggling to adapt to. And that, of course, is us.
This is the dark chapter, conservation.
It really is.
We talked about the Victorian plunder, which is horrific, but the source makes it painfully clear that the threat hasn't gone away. It's just changed its shape.
Habitat loss is the big obvious one. We are clearing tropical forests for cattle pasture or palm oil plantations at an alarming rate. That is wiping out entire ecosystems and with them, species of orchids we haven't even named yet.
But the book also highlights local destruction. In this part, the story of the lady slipper in England, it really hit me.
Cypripedium calceolus. It's a stunningly beautiful plant, a bright yellow pouch with spiraling maroon petals. It used to be relatively common across northern England in the limestone hills.
People would pick them, right?
They'd pick them by the armful to put on their dinner tables, and collectors dug them up for their gardens. And slowly, they vanished.
And now,
the source states there is literally one single plant remaining in the wild in England.
one plant.
One plant. It is functionally extinct in the wild, and the craziest part of the story, That one plant is under 24-hour guard,
Wait, what? Like with police protection?
like wardens and volunteers. During the short time it's in flower, people sit in lawn chairs and watch the plant day and night to ensure no one comes and tries to dig it up or pick the flower.
That is one of the most surreal things I've ever heard.
Right.
A single flower with its own security detail.
It shows you how desperate the situation has become. And it's not just an English problem. The book mentions Cypripedium accal, the pink lady slipper in the United States. In states like Illinois and Tennessee, it's endangered.
Why?
The book cites commercial exploitation, which is a polite way of saying poaching. People are illegally digging them up from national parks and forests to sell them or to try and plant them in their own gardens.
And the source is very, very blunt about the ethics of this.
Crystal clear. Never take an orchid from the wild. Period. Full stop.
And apart from the fact that it's illegal, you can face serious jail time and fines. There's a really practical reason not to do it, right?
They almost always die. Remember the fungus. A wild orchid is deeply connected to the specific soil web of that particular forest, the particular patch of ground. When you dig it up, you sever that connection.
And you can't replicate it in your garden?
No. You put it in your garden soil, which doesn't have the right fungus, and the plant slowly starves to death over a year or two. It is a death sentence.
So if we want these cool, rare species, if I decide I really want a lady slipper in my yard, what do I do?
You buy nursery-raised stock. The source is very clear on this. There are incredible nurseries that are now legally propagating these rare species from seed in laboratories.
So these are plants that have never seen the wild.
Exactly. And that's better for two huge reasons. One, you aren't stealing from nature and contributing to their extinction. And two, the plant has been raised in a pot its whole life. It is acclimated to captivity. It doesn't need the wild fungus because it's been weaned off it in the lab. You are buying a plant that will actually live and thrive for you.
So buy from the good guys. Support the nurseries that are doing the hard work of propagation, not poaching.
You vote with your wallet. It's the only way to stop the illegal trade.
Which brings us perfectly to our final segment, the practical guide. Let's say our listener is inspired. They want to go beyond the supermarket moth orchid, or maybe they just want to buy a moth orchid that actually won't die in a week. How do we shop smart?
The source identifies the impulse buy as the primary enemy of success.
I am so guilty of this. I see the pretty flowers, I'm in a rush, I grab it.
And that usually leads to disaster. So if you are at the store, there are specific selection criteria you should use. And the first rule is, do not look at the open flowers.
Ignore the pretty flowers. That's the whole point.
The open flowers are already on their way out. You want to look at the buds. You want a plant that has plenty of unopened buds still in the stem. And this is the exact phrase the book uses. They should be green and pert.
Green and pert. I like that.
If the buds are yellow or shriveled or look dry and papery, that's a condition called bud blast. It means the plant has been stressed, probably during shipping, and it's aborting those flowers. They are going to fall off before they ever open.
That's a great tip. What else?
Look at the leaves. They should be stiff, glossy, and upright. If they are limp, leathery, or wrinkled like a raisin, the plant is severely dehydrated. And finally, check the roots.
How can you see the roots?
In those clear plastic pots that moth orchids usually come in, you can. Healthy roots are plump and firm, and they're usually a silvery white or green color. If they are brown and mushy, they are rotting. If they are hollow and papery, they are dead.
So you want a plant with green buds, stiff leaves, and plump roots.
That's the trifecta.
And the source has a pretty strong opinion on where to buy.
Supermarkets are convenient, but the plants there are often stressed and you get zero advice. A specialized orchid nursery like McBean's or your local growers is much better. The plants are healthier and you can talk to an expert. But the best place of all, an orchid show.
I didn't even know these were a big thing until I read this.
Oh, they are huge events. They usually happen from late fall to early spring. Imagine a big convention center just filled with thousands upon thousands of blooming orchids from dozens of different vendors. You can compare plants, talk to the actual growers, get great advice, and find all the weird stuff we've been talking about.
But a very important warning from the source if you are traveling internationally to one of these shows.
Yes, do not, under any circumstances, try to bring an orchid home in your suitcase across an international border.
Because of those conservation laws.
CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. Orchids are one of the most highly regulated plant families in the world. You need complex USDA permits and phytosanitary certificates. If you get caught smuggling an orchid, even by accident, they will confiscate it and you could face very significant fines.
So keep your orchid shopping domestic.
It's the safest bet, by far.
All right, let's wrap this incredible deep dive up. We started this hour looking at a $20 plant in a plastic pot in a grocery store.
And we've ended up traversing the entire globe and 4,000 years of human history.
We've learned that this plant is a master of deception. It looks like a bug, it can smell like a rotting mushroom, and it tricks bees into doing forced labor.
We've learned that it's an engineering marvel, fusing its reproductive parts into a single unit and relying on a fungal nanny to babysit its children.
And we've learned that it carries this heavy, dramatic history, from the Chinese emperors to the Victorian thieves to the modern cloning labs. It has been an object of intense obsession for 4 millennia.
And yet, despite all that human attention, it is more fragile and endangered in the wild than it has ever been.
That's the great irony of the orchid, isn't it? We can clone 1 million of them in a factory in Holland, but we can't seem to stop the last one in a forest in England from going extinct.
We can copy the digital file 1 million times, but we are slowly deleting the original document. And once the habitat is gone, the context that created all these amazing, bizarre adaptations is gone forever.
So here's our final thought for you. The next time you are in that supermarket aisle and you hear the squeak of the cartwheel, just stop at that display for a moment. Look at that $15 moth orchid, but really look at it.
Look at the labellum, the runway.
Imagine the specific insect it's waiting for. Imagine the microscopic parasitic seed it came from and the fungus that fed it when it was just a speck of dust.
Respect the survivor in the plastic pot.
Exactly. Don't just buy a decoration. Adopt a piece of living, breathing biological history. And hey, for goodness sake, look for those green pert buds.
Always.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.